Hi, everyone. So I think we can begin now. I think we are live now. I'll start off by just introducing myself. I am Ananya. I am an electronics and instrumentation engineer, and before coming to XLRI, I worked at Deloitte for 2 years in the risk and financial advisory domain. If others could go on with the introduction.
Yeah, hi everyone. This is Himanshu Mishra, and I was born in Odisha. I've read and fed mostly in parts of Odisha, West Bengal, and Sikkim. I did my graduation in electrical engineering from Jamshedpur in 2018, post which I was working with PwC India as a technology consultant for almost 3 years in the domain of data and analytics. Then I decided to do an MBA and I joined XLRI Jamshedpur. I'll be interning in a conglomerate this time.
Hi everyone, I am Ankita Phate. I'm from Pune and I have completed my electrical engineering in 2018 from College of Engineering, Pune. Post that, I joined Indian Oil Corporation Limited and I have worked in the operations as well as the HR domain before joining the the HR program at XLRI Jamshedpur.
Hi everyone, I am Rajeshi. So I have done my undergraduation in microbiology. So after that, like most of my friends, I moved into post-graduation, which was in biotech. So after that, basically, I wanted to explore my career and explore more opportunities, which is why I decided to pursue MBA. And now I am a first year student at XLRI, and I will be interning at a major e-commerce firm this year.
We also have Shefali who got dropped off. I think we'll have an introduction once she joins back. So I think let's just get into it. If we have any questions already? I don't think we have any. So I think we can just start with how we went about preparation once we got our calls.
Right. So I think one of the first questions that anybody gets asked in an interview is, why do you want to do an MBA? I think it's very important to have this question very, very personalized to yourself. Like for me, it's very difficult even now to give a convincing answer, but then that answer should appear convincing to your interviewer, right? You need to talk about things that are specific rather than things that are very general. For me, I talked about life at a PSU. I talked about how I wanted exponential over linear growth. I spoke about how it made sense from my life perspective, the experiences I had, and how everything adds up to me doing an MBA now. So I think that is a good way, like to weave a story is a good way to go about it.
Yeah, I think I did somewhat similar. So basically, they were asking that you have already done post-graduation, why don't you go ahead with PhD? So I basically convinced that whatever I had learned, basically we did a lot of experimentation and data analysis. I could bring that skills to the table, and I wanted to gain a more wider base for my career. So yeah, like Ankita said, whatever you do, make sure it's convincing and make sure you connect it to your past. In my case, I also had done a small case competition, so I linked it to that as well. That is how my interest grew.
Yeah, so when it comes to my case, as I told, I was working in consulting. So as Ankita and Rajesh has also already mentioned, that you need to customize it as per your own background. And for my case, I told, like, if I work in consulting and I was in the technology side of it, so I would probably hone more of my technical skills. But when it comes to a holistic overview of how management works or how business decisions at the strategic levels are taken, I might lack that acumen, so to say, business acumen, to make those major decisions. So that is how I framed my answers around. I don't have exact reference to how my answer was, but it was on similar lines. So to all the aspirants who are going forward, that's a very major chance of you getting asked this question, that why would you like to do MBA and why would you like to do MBA now? So customize it as per your background and try to bring a narrative out of it. Don't really put in just facts out just in place, but also bring a narrative about why and how your education or your work experience would overall contribute to becoming a person, better person in MBA.
Yes, and more than that, I think what we have been taught after coming to MBA is whenever it's sort of a statement of purpose, right? So it's always better to begin it with a purpose of what made you decide to do an MBA in the first place. So for me, for my case, for example, I had some managerial experience, some informal managerial experience, but that also counts. So I gave examples of that. I had led a team informally for a Facebook page. I mentioned about that is how my interest grew. And so I think that it is very personal, a very customized approach is what works, because we have to understand that those panelists have been there for 10, 15, 20 years, so there's nothing that they haven't seen already. So when you personalize it, it's something new, and I think it gives something to talk about in the interview going forward.
Hi everyone. I think my panelists have added in a lot of great details. My name is Shafali, and I am also a student at XLRI and in the current HR batch. And I'll be interning this summer at an FMCG company. Now, regarding the question about why MBA, I would say that since I'm actually a fresher, and to bring in a perspective of a fresher, I would like to say that one of the most popular answers that freshers usually give is that I perhaps did not want to break from my studies, and I wanted to keep preparing for something and push deeper into accounts till I finally broke into the corporate world. And some people also mention how they would prefer to get a little bit of corporate exposure before fully going into a role that they would like. Now, especially when it comes to HR, I'd like to add that perhaps one very great distinction that you could add is HR starting jobs versus HR jobs post an MBA are very, very different. And if you have a keen interest in HR already, which is to leverage your answer and actually talk about how you want to start off in HR from the strategy level and how you want to bring about a change along the same way. So that's it from my side. Since we've gone ahead with this question, I think we can move on to the second question, which is how to start off our introduction. So let's go ahead with Ankita.
Okay, so that's a very that's again another very, very commonly asked question. I think each and every interview starts with this question, like introduce yourself, right? So I think it's very important to have a nice 60 to 90-minute speech about yourself, right? And you need to customize it. You need to have a short version of it, a long version of it. You also need to kind of have something which is not on your application form. So in my Excel HR interview, it started with tell me something about yourself which is not already there on your application form. So then I had to kind of come up with an answer right then and there. But then I think it would be great if you could prepare an answer for something like that too. And I think the hygiene checks that you have to have are like, where are you from? What is your background? And a little something about your extracurricular activities, where you've worked. So all of this should be a part of your tell me about yourself question, and try to get the interviewers hooked on. Like, I think tell me about yourself is a question from where you can drive your entire interview, right? So try to get your interviewers hooked on to something that you would want them to go forward with. So yeah.
Yeah, I think I have similar points. So first thing is, tell them a good story. So basically they won't remember the facts like where you did your graduation from. They already know that. So the important thing is how you craft your story and tell them. And if you have done something interesting in your graduation, for example, let's say you participated in a state level event, or you have presented a paper at a national conference, or you have won some case study competition, just mention those facts. So what happens is that the interviewers, they get interested in those points, and then they ask questions about that. So in that way you can basically drive your interview. So like in my case, as I said earlier, I had a case study competition and I mentioned that, and I was prepared regarding that. So when they ask you about the question, you will already be prepared. So in that way you can drive your interview forward.
Adding on to what Ankita and Rajarsi have already told, I would just say that, bring in some spikes in your answers as well. If you have gone to an NGO or worked for an NGO, or you have done a special project, which is very different from what your friends might have done, and you are very confident about it, of course, because if you are not confident about something, I must say that, you shouldn't speak it in XLRI interviews at least, because XLRI's professors don't, I mean, as for me, it's my perspective, they probably don't come with a set of questionnaires which they are going to ask. They are coming up with 3 or 4 questions, and based on your answer or your response, they are going to dig deep into what you have spoken about. So it's very important for you to know thoroughly about what you are telling. So if you point out or you will speak about any quote in your introduction, so be sure about who spoke that or who wrote that quote, and then the background of the person who wrote that, and why are you very much interested in the quote. Or if you talk about any of your hobbies, so to say. For example, in my case, I talked about drone videography and drone photography. So they asked me about how this interest pursue in itself, how do drones fly, and what are the drone laws in India. So be sure that whatever you speak, a background about what it is about. So I mean, that is something that you can take care of, apart from what my colleagues have already mentioned.
Yes, apart from the spikes, it does not necessarily even have to be an achievement. If it's an achievement, of course, it's better. But even if you have a hobby, actually, both of my BM and HR interviews did start with a conversation about my extracurricular activities. So it went ahead, and after that, it went to different things, and it took a different turn altogether, which it could have been on my work X or on my acads, but it did not go that way. And since it was something that I enjoyed, I actually, both of those interviews were very engaging and conversational, and I was at ease. So I think that that is one thing, that just, even if it's a hobby, even if it's not an achievement, just mention it, just try to incorporate it into your introduction, and I think that that will lead an interview in a very different direction.
Yes, and to add on to that, actually what happened with me was quite funny. My interviewer did not ask me at all to tell me about myself, to tell them about myself. So what had happened was that they started asking me academic questions because I was a fresher, and I was very prepared with this "tell me yourself" answer, because I knew that, bringing in the diversity in my profile would perhaps be my biggest ticket. I realized that this conversation is probably not going in the way where they're probably even going to ask me to tell them about myself. I had to push the answer into another question. So this is perhaps something that you might have to keep an eye out for, because you have to be able to show the kind of diversity in your character. So if you've done a couple of internships, you've done a couple of projects, you've won in several competitions, or you have this, curiosity to participate everywhere and to learn things, whatever it is. Whatever it is that makes you who you are, if for any direction, then make sure that you try and include it in any of the other answers that you might be answering. So this is what happened with me. And I think from here onwards, we can move to a live question that we've received from our audience, which is, can you please tell us what XLRI looks for in its potential students? So let's start with Ankita.
Right. So from what I have gathered from my interview experience, as well as almost 7-8 months at XLRI, I think what Excel wants in its students is a deep sense of purpose and alignment of that purpose with the core values of XLRI, that is excellence and integrity. So I think, when you are asked why MBA, why HR, what do you want to do with your life in the next 5 to 10 years? When you have sound answers to these questions, I think you know what you're doing with your life. You have at least a sense of direction, a sense of purpose. I think that interview goes in a very, very nice direction. And I think that is something that Excel looks for in all of its students, apart from, of course, diversity and a general, presence of mind.
Yeah, adding on to that, I think they definitely look at your overall profile, though they do not actually tell the weightage. But yeah, and in interview, I think they look for, like Ankita said, a sense of purpose and how confident you are and how you carry yourself throughout the interview. So sometimes it might happen that the panelists will grill you just to check your reaction. So in those situations, you should be calm and just like put a smile on your face and back whatever you are saying. For example, even if you give a correct answer, just to check your reaction or just to put you in a difficult spot, they will just say that, are you sure about this, do you really think this is the correct answer? But if you know that you are correct, just back it up. And apart from that, I think if you do the basic checks and you have a good profile, you have prepared well for the interview, it should be fine, and you should get through.
Yeah, adding on to what my colleagues have already told, I think XLRI looks at a lot of things when they take you inside before even for the interviews. I think first thing they look at your profile and your scores. I mean, any of these two, or either of these two, or all both of these two have to be on a higher side. And secondly, when it comes to performing in the interview, they look at your confidence. They look at the way you handle hypothetical questions, or even how you're thinking on feet, and also about how your interview goes, because till the time you are in the interview, your percentile matters, but after you are in the interview in front of a panelist, it's all about how you take on further. So there will be multiple, as Radarshi told, that there will be multiple rounds of grilling that you may encounter in the interview. So it won't be one level of question, when they ask you a certain questions and then you tell the answer, but there might be multiple levels that they ask you to go into and talk about those. So be prepared about it, and secondly, be confident about whatever you are speaking. You may be wrong at times when you are giving when you're saying some things, but have a rationale about why you are saying whatever you are telling. I think they are looking forward for the rationale rather than how you are getting the answer. So that is something that you guys should look into before telling or speaking anything in the interview.
Exactly. I don't think they're testing the knowledge, because you cannot test the knowledge in 20-minute slot that you have. So I think they're basically looking at how you approach things and how you do not get rattled. So what happened in my HR interview was I was grilled a lot, because HR was my first preference. So I think they were trying to see, because it did not really align with my work ex or my graduation at all. So I think that they were trying to grill me a lot just to see how much interest I actually have in HR. And the only key to the entire interview was to not get rattled by their grilling. So even as a professional in corporate, they know that there would be times when we would be put in spot and situations like that. And by putting you in a spot like that, they're just trying to assess how well you handle it. So I think that was the biggest thing, to not get rattled. Even if you do not know something, just say that I'm sorry, I'm not aware, and just move forward. So just accepting when you, and one thing that I've noticed that was different from the other IM interviews that I gave was that you cannot really gas around. That's a term that we use. You cannot gas around with the professors here. They will call you out on it and they will take your case. So do not try to. They've been here for way longer than we have, so they know, they have listened to all of this before. So don't try to do that. Just be honest and just tell the facts as it is. Of course, we have to sugarcoat it, but then just stay honest. And I think that should work.
Yeah. And I think one final thing that I'd like to add is that the pan answers. So what happened in my case was that I was because I had studied a few HR concepts in my UG because I was a commerce student. So what had happened was that they were asking me a lot of leadership theories and all of that, and they kept asking me about whether it's still relevant, what are the pros, what are the cons, and they just kept diving deeper and deeper and deeper into it. And what I noticed was, based on the answers that I was giving out, they kept trying to test whether my thought process was based on my opinion, or was it just based on something I learned from a textbook. So this is also, who narrates things out of a textbook or says something that the team manager said to them. They want people with opinions and they want to know the rationale behind this opinion. So this is something that you have to be very careful about in the way that you answer your questions for the interview. So I think from here onwards, we can move on to what is your purpose for choosing HR, which also aligns with one of our live questions, which is regarding how can freshers as well prepare for answering while HR. So I think we can handle both of these together. So
okay, do I go ahead, Shefali?
yes, please.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so my answer is predominantly going to be from a work ex point of view. As I mentioned before, I have 3 years of work experience in operations as well as HR. So answering this question was actually easy and also very difficult for me, because on one hand, I was like, I have an engineering degree and I want to go into HR. So it is the but obvious choice for me, right? But the second thing was that I had already worked in HR. They're like, why do you want to do a degree in HR? So I think from my own personalized point of view, I had to bring in the concept of, how in the future, how in the greater scheme of things in the long run, it makes sense for me to do an MBA in HR. Like while I had worked on the technical or the transactional HR side of things, I wanted to move towards the transformational HR side of things, right? So that was the answer that I gave. Again, I would say that avoid saying things like I'm a people person, or I like working with people, because that is a very cliche answer, and the people will grill you if you give out answers like that. Have a personalized answer as to why HR. Like, I think you can talk about general HR trends or things that you have seen happening around you. Like, at least for WorkX individuals, you can state examples from your own company, or like if you've seen an HR head and you have seen that that person has graduated from XLRI Jamshedpur. Like, suppose, don't give Leena Nair's example because everybody knows that. But if that example also can be personalized, I think it makes a great difference, because that you're aware of what is happening in the HR of your company, and then that has inspired you to go into HR. So I think that constitutes a good answer.
Yeah, I think adding on to that, from a fresher's perspective, I think it's very important to have, some solid fact-based answers and not just guess around, like saying that I like to work with people. They will say something that, why don't you choose a different profession or do something? So that puts you in a bad light. So instead, if you have read something regarding HR, for example, the recent trends like HR analytics, you can talk about that. And if you are mentioning something like that, be sure to be prepared, at least have some basic knowledge about the field, because they will ask more questions, that why are you interested in it, what do you know about it, how will you apply it in future. So yeah, be prepared. And for example, if you have done something like case competitions, or you have studied some of the HR topics in your undergrad, you can also mention that from there you got your interest and you want to do HR.
So my WorkX was completely different from Ankita's, and like Ankita had an HR WorkX, but I did not. Mine was totally not technical, but towards the analyst or consulting side. So for me, I did give a people's person sort of answer, and I was grilled heavily on it. So don't do that. The redemption was a very difficult thing that I had to do, but I think the last answer saved me. But don't do that. Try to form, if you have WorkX, try to go through the HR policies of your company. So I did that, and I actually mentioned some of the policies of Deloitte that I really liked. So I think that justified that yes, I had gone through those policies, even though I did not really have the need for it. For example, some kind of nepotism policy or something like that. So I did not really have the need for it, but that just showed that I did have some interest and I did take the time to go through it. You could go through the current affairs and something that is, HR trends or something like that. You could say that you have read up on all of this and you think that this would be the right fit for you. And from a WorkX point of view, I think that you can see that you have seen HR departments working and you would want to be in that position, or you have seen some crisis and you think that you can handle it better. So I think that those kinds of answers really work for you because they are coming from a place of experience and not just something that's in your head. So I think that for WorkX, I think it's pretty sorted that you can just mention examples from your organization.
Right. And finally, to add on, as a fresher, if you had to answer why HR and why is it that you're sitting for this interview, I think you can draw from two major sources. One is your experience, and the other is what you've heard and read, right? So when you speak about what your experiences could be, the first one could be perhaps things that you've noticed in internships you've done, or even things in your UG for that matter. How do you see the administration is done? What is the kind of policies on the basis of which you can pick up like key HR concepts and actually try and incorporate it in the world that's already yours, right? And building upon this, you can also perhaps read up a couple of starter HR books. There are many in the market, like Harvard Business Reviews are like really good starting books for HRs, for HR topics, and they're quite thin, so it's not going to take you a lot of time either. So you can really pick that up in case you have no idea about the field, and that gives you a very deep dived but micro perspective on what I did was that I picked up a novel which was written by this CEO, and after reading that book, I got a really good idea of what HR does as a function overall. So in my interview, when I was answering the questions, I was able to give a very holistic perspective, and they could see that I knew what I was talking about, and I wasn't just throwing terms around. So it's very important to bring that perspective into the conversation as well, especially when you're a fresher and they don't expect that kind of context from you. So that's something to look out for as well. And I think now we'll move on to our next tested in our interviews. So basically, did they ask us any kind of situational questions, hypothetical questions? What was it? So let's start with Ankita one more time.
Okay, so there were two kinds of questions. First was situational questions, and the second was behavioral questions. So I think we were asked to fill out a form before our personal interviews. So the questions that I was asked in my interview, they were kind of an extension of whatever I had written in my interview form, right? So there were situational questions like, what would you do if faced with a situation like this? Or a behavioral question like, in the past, when have you been in a situation where you had to showcase these, such and such values? So I think it's important to go over your life as a whole and have some experiences ready where you can, narrate it like a story. Situational questions, I think you should not answer it in a very extreme way. Have a very balanced, holistic approach towards answering situational questions. And behavioral questions, of course, you need to have stories. You need to kind of rehearse them in your mind and realize how to kind of, fit those stories into different contexts. Like, it is possible that you do not have a different story for every answer, but then you can kind of force fit one story into multiple questions. So I think that was my strategy for handling situational questions and behavioral questions.
Yeah, so I was also asked a couple of situational questions, but I think they did not follow exactly what I had written in the form. So they had some new questions, but yeah, as Ankita said, it is important to have, just 2-3 versions of your story, or just have the basic facts ready so that you can mold it according to the situation. So for example, you can quote the same story in multiple cases. Let's say that they ask you how you took charge of a situation, then you can also tell the same story. And in second, if they ask that how you had to negotiate with a team, you can put the same story in both the places, but just like tweak it a bit so that it seems like you are giving your answer to that particular question. And apart from that, I think it's very important to have a in-depth understanding of the situation. So whenever you tell a story or any situation or any event you have been a part of, they will go deeper into that and they will ask questions from multiple perspectives. So be prepared about that as well.
I think Rajesh has already given us fresher's perspective about what can you probably be asked in an HR interview about the situations. I would take it up how, from a person who has some certain experience and comes to the interview, what are the interviewers trying to think or trying to ask you about? First thing is they might ask you about the HR policies that you currently have in your companies. You need not have to know all of them, but keep an eye about your performance appraisals, keep an eye about the compensation and benefit parts, and how do you think that works, and how do you think you would have changed had you been in the position of HR head or something. And then how do you justify the fairness of the company at present. I think they want to know your perspective about whether you know these things or not. Secondly, what comes in handy is if you know about the CSR activity that your company does, if you have read a little bit of the HR policies that your company has, that is something of a benefit, I would say. If you have any portal where you fill up certain forms for your performance appraisal or for any kind of tax benefits or something, then you also can mention about that in case you are asked about it. So it gives an upper hand about the fact that you are aware of the HR terminologies or the HR things that happens in the corporates. And specifically, if I tell about how one of the questions that I remember I was asked in an entire interview was, how do you define the performance appraisal, or sorry, what are the policies in the current HR system that your company has which you like, and what are the things that you don't like? And I was told to justify about which things I would have probably changed in the company's policy if I was in the position. So yeah, I think this is about it from my end.
All right. So I think now let's move on to our next live question, which is basically how long are XLRI interviews typically? So I would like to invite Raj to answer this first.
Yeah, so basically you get about 20 to 30 minutes, but still it depends on the panelist. If you have a really good conversation, it might extend up to 30 minutes, but typically not more than that because they have time restrictions as well. So yeah, like try to have an engaging conversation and you won't really realize that how the time went.
Yeah, I think I agree to Raj. In my case, my BM interview lasted for around 35 to 40 minutes, while my HR interview went for more than 1 hour. So it all depends upon how the conversation is going. So don't really worry about the time duration, because it might so happen that they like you in the first 15-20 minutes, and then the meeting, I mean the conversation might get wrapped up, and it's okay. You might also get selected. And secondly, the interview might actually extend beyond 1 hour, and still you may not make it. So it doesn't really depend upon the duration, but typically if you ask, it's around, as Raj told, it's 25 to 35 minutes.
Yes, thank you so much. And our next question, which has come from our live audience, is we need to brush up current affairs, but what is the depth of knowledge that is expected from us during the interviews? So for example, are salient features of the budget good enough, or should we go deeper? So for this, I guess, can you try and answer this question?
Right. Yeah, Shafali. So I understand that the budget is a very important topic from an MBA preparation point of view. But at the same time, you need to kind of realize that in your HR interview, you need to understand that you need to have a basic knowledge of how your labor codes are going to be. The labor codes are something that is new in the HR field. And I think just understanding the concepts, it is not like you have to read the acts and know the rules. Just what is new and how the codes have changed or how the acts have changed. So I think having that understanding from an HR perspective is important. I was specifically asked this because I have worked in HR, so that was kind of expected from me. But then I think having this knowledge is important. Secondly, I think this is particularly for HR. I think having a general idea about how HR analytics works, or how culture impacts HR, or how organizational design works. So I think having a very surface level or a conceptual understanding of these topics is important as you go for an HR interview specifically, like more than knowing the budget, or more than I think that is more important, but then it also depends on your work ex. So yeah.
Yes, so I think that in my case, and in also some of my acquaintances who appeared for HR interviews, we did not have anything related to HR in our WorkX or ACATS, but they were, for example, you are supposed to go deep, know deeper about the budget if you are from a finance background. That makes sense. But from an engineering background, of course, they don't expect you to know everything about it. But of course, just being aware, you should not sound ignorant is what it is. And I think that it depends a lot on the background. And of course, for a person with WorkX and everything, the HR policies and those would be more relevant for HR, but that does not mean that it depends heavily on the panel that you get. There might be some professor who's from finance and who might be interested in talking about the budget. So you cannot ignore it. So I think a surface level understanding is required, but going deeper into it would depend on your background.
Another thing that I'd like to add about current affairs is that this is an extremely extensive and vast topic. So even panelists know that it's extremely impossible for you to have to know the answer to everything, right? So if early deep into current affairs, then that might not help in your favor, because the panelist is expecting you to be aware, but they don't have much of an expectation for you to have very deep knowledge. Of course, if you have it, then that's great. There's no comparing to that. But in case you don't, and how I would suggest you can go about prepping for current affairs is that another thing that you can look for is that if you have a sector in mind in which you would want to work in the future, right, then you can extensively read up on that particular sector and quote incidents from there. Perhaps let's post your MBA, then you can talk about how Jet Airways laying off its employees, what kind of effect it had on the company, and what kind of HR policies all of that had. So this is something that would be a back and forth conversation between you as well as the professors. So even the current affairs needn't be like a lateral conversation. It could go both ways. So yeah. So this is regarding current affairs. Now let's move on to the next question that we'd like to deal with, which is the relevance of academics as well as work experience in our preparation for the interview.
I can start.
Yeah, sure. Himanshu, go ahead.
Yeah, I think as I have already told, like it's very important to have an understanding of what you are doing in the company. I would not take it from the UG perspective, because I believe my fresher friends would take it up. But when it comes to the background of the work experience thing, you need to have an understanding of what you are doing, how your work is contributing in a over a broader perspective, and third is the bird's eye view of the project itself where you are contributing your work. So it's very important that when you are asked about what you work in or what are you currently working in, you need to give 1 or 2 liners about what your work is about. Secondly, you need to have the the numbers or the figures about how important your contribution is, and how what the project actually contributes to, or what the end result is. So I think it's very important to know a holistic overview of the project itself.
Yes, and for example, some projects you do not have to, you have to explain that to them in a very layman language and not get into the technical details. So for doing that, you need to make sure that you're not giving them details about what you do on a day-to-day basis. For example, if you're working in audit, you would want to tell them about what kind of risks you are addressing, and not what exactly you're checking or what are the figures that you're looking at, but instead just a sort of an overview of what is the purpose of what you're doing. So I think that would make more sense from an MBA point of view. So that is one thing, to not get into the details and the nitty-gritty of your work.
Right. And to answer this question from a fresher's perspective, I would say that academics are extremely important. If for any reason in this online mode you have not studied, or you have not paid attention in your classes, then core subjects. If I had to speak about myself, I'm a commerce graduate. So in my case, what I was questioned on a lot was economics, statistics, and as well as HR and management concepts. So management concepts is something which is a very basic foundation in any commerce course. And for people who are freshers but are not from the commerce background, let's say you might be an engineer, you might be a science student for that matter, you can very easily Google up, basic management terms that or theories for that matter. So you can look at the core foundations of HR, and if you're aware of this, then the panelists would know that you have come prepared. So the conversation would steer in that direction. So a CATS, irrespective of what field you're coming from, even if you're, let's say, a naval architecture engineer or something, or if you're coming from like the defense background for any reason, so irrespective of where you're coming from, they will ask you questions regarding your CATS. So please be well prepared. And if for any reason you are not prepared, let's say the D-days you're and you have not been able to, in that case, try and be calm, because even you never know what direction the interview could go in. So in that case, try and tell them that your what your favorite subjects are, and take the conversation in that direction. So yes. Now let's go on to the next question, which we've gotten from our live, which is, should we expect some grilling on why HR when we've put BM as the first preference?
I can take this up.
So I would like to invite Himanshu.
I think, yeah, I can take this up. So I think it doesn't really matter which you take it as a first preference. However, you need to have a rational you need to give justification about why you have taken something as a first preference. Like I remember in my HR interview, the first question that was asked to me was what is the meaning of your name, and the second question that was asked was about which is your first preference and why. And that is when I told BM was my first preference, and I gave a rationale towards why it was, and it was completely fine. It is completely fine. I think it depends really about how well you justify why you have taken it as your first preference. And remember, HR profs might be in the BM interviews, and marketing, finance prof can be in the HR interviews. So you cannot really say something good about something in that interview itself. So you please be honest about why you are taking something as your first preference, and just go ahead with your answer irrespective of the interview you are in.
I also had BM as my first preference. So when they asked, I was just honest about it that, I have not really decided about which specialization I wanted to do. So as BM give more options, I chose that. And like Himanshu said, that there could be cross profs, and also like you might get one interviewer common in both of your interviews. So, it happens that they remember what you said in the previous interview. And if you change your answers there, they will obviously grill you on that. So it's just be honest and have your reasons. And if you just tell them honestly with proper reasons, that will be fine.
Right. So like Rajarshi mentioned, it actually happened with a few of my friends that in their interview panel, there was one professor who was a part of both of their interview panels, right? So what he said in his BM interview, he couldn't kind of justify it in his HR interview, and vice versa. So I think, see, the professors are also aware that you are going to give both interviews, but then have a good reasoning about what you're saying where, right? So you can't always justify why HR over BM or why BM over HR, but then say something that is not controversial in both interviews. So I think that is one of the most important things. Don't say controversial things. Like in your BM interview, you cannot go and diss HR, like, no, why would I do HR anyway? Like something, don't say something like that. So like, don't dig your own grave is all I'll say.
Thank you so much, guys, for your valuable input. One thing that I think will be asked in different versions to both workers as well as freshers is that if you're a fresher, they will ask you what advantage does a fresher bring versus someone with work experience. And if you have a lot of work experience or just a little bit, they will like, why are you coming back to college and all of that? What is the point of taking work ex and coming here when we have freshers who are coming directly from college? So this is the first question that we'll be taking, post which we'll talk about what is it that we all usually prepared for during our interviews. This is a fresher bring to versus someone with work ex. Now, in this case, you have to be very careful regarding making sure you don't make any controversial statements, like my colleagues have already mentioned. You have to be sure that you're not. This is not just a a question that's trying to see what it is that you really think. This is also an attitude test of sorts, because if you show, you know, a kind of negative attitude and you show kind of dominance of your personality over another, then if they see that in your answer, then it could be an eliminating point for you. So you have to be very careful in the way that you word question, answers like this. And perhaps one way in which you can answer, a very popular way of answering this question from a fresher's perspective is that freshers always bring a very, very diverse and, you know, clean slate to the classroom. And they have a very, because they come with a clean slate, they have a lot of creative ideas that isn't limited by their work ex or their previous background. So this is something that panelists have heard over and over again. So you can also go ahead with this answer or any other answer in your version that you think might be added. All right, so I think we can go with what it is that we all prepared for in our personal journeys for our interview. So I'd like to start with Ankita one more time. What was it, Ankita, that you started preparing for during the interview?
Right. So before I go to that, I think I'll answer your question first. That what advantage does having a work ex hold over being a fresher, right? Because I'm sure some of the work ex people also are listening. See, MBA is all about peer learning, right? So wherever you have worked, you might have worked in the aviation industry, you might have worked in the consulting industry, you may have worked in oil and gas. So when you're sitting in a class of say 60, 70, 180 students, you bring that different perspective, right? So if you're discussing a case and you're discussing a case about the aviation industry, and if you've worked there, you can bring in the inside experience of that industry, and that is how you contribute as a work ex professional, right? So when you worked, you have a certain understanding of the ways of the world, right? How you handle people or how you handle situations better. So I think having work ex in general, it would never be a bad thing for you. So but then again, you have to leverage that fact. Now going on to how I exactly prepared for my interviews. I think one of the most important things that I prepared was knowing my job, my company, and my industry inside out, because that was what I have 3 years of work ex. So I think I knew where my interview was going to go, and I have experience in operations as well as in HR. So I think it was very, very important to deep dive to know each and everything about myself, my job, my industry very, very well. And I think um, it is important to know about current affairs. It is important to know about what is going on in the world. But I think it is also very, very important to know yourself very well. Like simple things like, what does your name mean? My surname has fate in it. Like it is actually called Fate, but it has fate. But then I was asked about Greek mythology, right? So like these are very simple things, but then I think if you prepare it, keeping in mind the fact that you can be asked these things, I think it goes a long way that way. So yeah, like focus on the minute details about everything that you stand for in general.
All right, I think if anyone else, or even me for that matter, I would say I think I'll add to this then. In my personal prep, what I started off with was that I divided my entire prep into different buckets. So there was this bucket which was dedicated to me and myself alone. So this was regarding my personality. What is it that, are my core strengths, weaknesses? What is it that I need to work on? Things like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? All of that. So this is like a lot of people try and discard these questions. They think, okay, when the interview comes, to make a very clear request to the audience to not do this, because you have to be very, very clear and crisp about these answers more than anything else. And apart from this, I also the other buckets that I was focusing on was my academic interests and also my experience through internships. So based on acads, I had to try and dive down into a few subjects that were extremely important for me and what it is that I wanted to focus focus on. So in case they ask me, in that case, I would have something to talk about. So this is also another aspect that you need to take care of. And regarding your experience as a fresher, you can talk about your internships or any kind of volunteering experience or any experience for that matter. It could even be experiences in clubs within your college or any other kind of PORs that you might have held. So you need to very clearly think about what it is that you've learned from all of these experiences and how all of this makes you ready to either do an either do an MBA or pursue, HR. So try and look at all these buckets of experiences and see what can be done. Now, we have a very interesting question which has come up in our live chat, which is regarding a third world problem. And our person of interest has said that he or she has marked all the answers. We have been asked if this will create an issue. So I think the best person to answer this question would be Raj. So Raj, what do you think about this?
So first of all, I think congratulations, you had like 1 in a 4 chance of getting the cutoff clear, and you did that and you got a call. So basically I was not very much fluent in GK as well, so basically till last minute I revised and then some of the answers clicked. So yeah, so basically the thing is, like, if you have got a call now, they won't ask you about your percentile or your GK percentile or anything, so it does not create too much of a problem. So just focus on the interview and prepare your best, like others have been saying that prepare your ACATs, and if your work is obviously prepare on that, and I think you should be fine.
All right. So I think with this, we have reached about the ending of this, discussion, and we'd like to conclude on some final tips for the D-Day, right? So we can start in any order. Anyone?
I'll go with it. So I think that I
come
believe
up and try and answer what it is.
Yeah. So I believe that 60% of it is what you do on the D-Day, and just 40% of it is the preparation. So there are a lot of things. So when I was doing my preparation interviews, they were always with one person. So somehow mentally I was not prepared to look at a panel, and Excel was my best call. So I was not ready to look at a panel and answer to them. And so I think that I was very intimidated at first. BM was my interview that I had scheduled earlier than HR. So in that sense that I was very intimidated. So that is one thing, to be mentally prepared. And also there are sometimes there's a waiting time for the interviews, like it's scheduled at 6:20, but you're waiting till 6:50 or 6 or 7. So in that case, that buffer time creates a lot of anxiety. So I think that you need to be prepared for that, because that can mess up your entire interview even if you're prepared to your best. And apart from that, I think that just having a sense of calm, because they're just looking for your attitude, they're not testing your knowledge. So in that case, just having the attitude, having a smile, just even if you make mistakes or are being grilled, just taking it with a smile and not getting rattled. So I think that worked for me, and that I think can work well for anybody.
Yeah, I think I can go next. Adding to what Ananya has already told, there are a couple of things that I would like to mention. First thing, whatever answers you are preparing, try to portray it very candidly, because don't try to frame it, in a way that you have mugged it up or you have come up with a pre set of answers. Secondly, try to be very much ethical in your answers, because once you, portray something in a unethical way, that will completely make you out of the game. So be very sure that whatever you're telling, it is ethically correct and it has high moral standards. Next is, try to frame certain hypothetical questions, particularly those asked in basic levels of consulting rounds. For example, what will you choose if I give you 2 glasses of water? You cannot ask, two glasses, basically one small glass and a big glass. You cannot further ask the interviewer about any questions, but you will have to answer this question by itself. Or second, if I may pose, which I was actually asked in the BM interview, that, there are 3 professors, one in his 40s, one in his 50s, and one in his 60s. Which one will you choose and why? So try to dig deep into this. There is no right or wrong answer into it. And you cannot, further probe the interviewer in most of the cases, unless and until the interviewer entertains you. So with this kind of questions, you try to bring in multiple perspectives. Instead of just telling, I'll choose this kind of class, or I'll choose this professor for this reason. You should actually give multiple perspectives and tell which professor would probably fit in better in a particular role or a particular teaching standard than the other, and so on. So I think these are some things that you can take care of. And thirdly, you are going to be future managers. So what they are also testing is your employability, your way of dealing the employees who will be under you, and the way you deal your shareholders who will be above you and the heads above you. So you may not be in a position where you have an answer to everything, but you need to make an answer out of it and tell in a very rational way, so that everything looks very good on paper and keeps the morale of all the employees high. So ensure that your answers, even if you are thinking on fit, think it in a way, or give rationale to the to statements which would make most of the stakeholders happy, if not all. So that would be my last piece of advice to all the aspirants. Wishing you all the best.
Yeah, so I think on the final day, it's very important to sleep early the previous night so that you are not tired on the day. Keep a bottle of water with you and some snacks, so that the waiting time can get frustrating. And also it's just like tell whoever is in a home that they do not disturb you, but at the same time make sure that like you can reach them. For example, like if you are texting them on WhatsApp, you might need something urgently. For example, the interviewer might ask you to show something proof, or it might happen not for example, one person I know, he had a cricket ball with him, so he used to play cricket, so they asked him to show something, hand movement or something with the ball. So basically that those things might happen, so you might need some last minute assistance. And regarding the questions, the first question is basically they will greet you very politely, and they will greet you very nicely, and typically they ask how are you doing, how are you feeling, are you stressed. So they try to actually make you comfortable. So just answer that clearly, like as if you're talking with a friend, and from there the interview actually starts. And after a point you also get comfortable with them, so they also start enjoying the interview, and that is how a conversation builds up, and that you are on the right track and you have a great interview. And regarding some of the questions, you won't know the answers, so there are two things that you can do. First, let's say if you have an idea, or let's say they ask you a situation based question, but you have a slightly different situation, so you can just clearly mention that I am taking a guess here, or I am trying my best, so I might be wrong. Just put that warning beforehand, or I have a slightly different situation, can I answer that? So 99% of the time they will say go ahead, and you can put that answer. And if you really don't anything, just don't gas around and make up something, because they will figure out and they will then grill you on that, and that is basically the end game of your interview. So just say that I do not know, or I cannot recollect at this moment, and I will look at it later. And one thing I think is kind of important is in the end, so they will also ask that do you have any questions for us? So please don't ask that same question, that how were you dealing with COVID and virtual classes, because that is the thing they are hearing from almost 90% of the people. So make something interesting. For example, in my case, I had gone through the course outline, I had picked one course and I had a question related to this. So the professor was also interested, like he answered it in much more detail than I expected. So I think those are the few of the tips from my side. And in the end, just keep your confidence. You have practiced, you have gone through the process, you have done what you could do till the day, and don't stress on the day, and just keep a smile on your face, and you should make it.
Now, what I'd like to add from my side are three things. One is be for anything at all, and the last thing is that always remember what works for you. Now, regarding being prepared about the institute, I would say that if you're sitting for XLRI's interview, then make sure you know what the institute stands for. So some basic things you can look at is XLRI's history. What did it start as? What did it turn into? What were the other things that fell into place? Another thing you can look at, you should look at actually, are XLRI's core values, because this was something that was asked to me in my interview. I was asked to state into the picture, and what is it that makes me a good candidate based on these values. So you must look at details like that as well. You can also look up at some professors and some kind of courses that they're taking that you might be interested in under the HR domain as well. So make sure you prep about the institute. The second thing is to prepare for anything at all. So what you you can try your best, right, to prepare for any kind of interview, but in the end, it's probably not going to go like you planned it to go. So in my case, what had happened was that as music is one of my hobbies, I like to SOP questions, and the panelists had read my answers. So I was asked to suggest some songs on the spot based on the panelists' interests. So I was taken aback because that was not how I was expecting the conversation to go. And I was like, A.R. Rahman or something. And I just, like I said the first thing that came to my mind. So you also have to make sure that you're not, so you aren't like, what do I say? You're not so stuck up, with your interview prep that the panelists might try to throw you off and test whether you're able to like swim across the waters. So be prepared for these kind of twists and turns in your interview as well. And the last thing I would like to recommend to all people who are sitting for this year's interviews is to always remember what works for you, right? If your peers are people who can work for 18 hours a day, and they will work till the last minute, before the interview starts, right? But you are not that kind of person. You want to make sure you're on the right headspace to sit for it. So please remember this difference between individuals, because XLRI really, really honors and appreciates the difference that is there in its candidatures. So make sure that you remember this and make sure that you stick by what works for you. Don't conform to like universal rules or like things that you might think are the correct way to prepare for an interview. Make sure you know what your strengths are and play by them. And this is all from.
Okay, great. Mostly everybody has covered all there is to it. I just have 2 more points. First is that be aware. While I don't think that Excel believes in taking stress interviews, sometimes it might just be. So even if you are faced with a panel that is grilling you for no reason at all, be aware that this happens. They might just be testing you for some quality that you are not aware of, right? So the important thing is to not lose your cool, be calm and be confident in any kind of an interview. The second thing is that, see, your preparation is important, but what is just as important is learning how to calm your nerves, right? Even if you've prepared very well, but if you're not calm on your D-Day, like you've prepared a lot for CAT, right? And if you don't go and perform on CAT, it will shake you, right? So just treat this interview as just another interview, right? Try to schedule your interviews in such a way that the interviews that you have higher on your priority list, try to schedule them later so that you can kind of practice before you go for the interviews that you actually want to give. So treat this interview like just another interview. It's just a conversation. They're just trying to get to know you better. You just have to portray the best version of yourself. Like, I think that is all that I have to say.
So I think with this, we have come to an end of our discussion. This is all from our side. All the best to all the candidates who will be sitting for this year's interviews. Do reach out to all of us on our LinkedIns as well in case you have any further questions. We'd all be very, very happy to help. So thank you from my side as well as the panel side. With this, we'll be calling an end to this.
Thank you.